child, James Madison grew up in a time where political opinions were high and change was on the horizon. As a young boy in a British colony, he would have been exposed to many contradictory viewpoints, but most would center on one thing: colonist grievances with Britain. Madison was the right age at the right time to become something great, especially given his education. Starting at a young age, Madison received a better education than most. His father had an extensive library where James Madison, a scholarly young man, spent much time. On top of that, Madison was homeschooled by his mother until his knowledge surpassed hers. Then he got a private tutor. He finished his formal education at Princeton, formerly known as the College of New Jersey. While in college, he met many people who would eventually become famous for how they shaped our nation. Madison also became a historical figure as Father of the Constitution, serving in the Virginia legislature, being the Secretary of State under Jefferson, and eventually being elected as the 4th President of the United States during the War of 1812. During Madison's final year of college, he started having more frequent epileptic seizures. These seizures had plagued him his entire life, but had become worse. It was onset when he overly exerted himself with his studies and did not exercise enough. It may not seem like a big deal, but those seizures helped shape our nation. Back then, the church considered you demon-possessed if you suffered from seizures. This attitude formed Madison's strong views on religious freedom and is one of the reasons we have the First Amendment today. As soon as the Articles of Confederation established a weak form of government, Madison began to think of ways to improve upon it. Madison spent years researching from over 4,000 volumes in his library. He became an expert on philosophical views on government, knew the success and failure of different forms of government, and even created his own ideas on how a government should be run, despite the fact that his ideas were contrary to common belief. Madison took the initiative to change the country and to research how a new constitution should be written. When Madison arrived at the convention held to revise the Articles of Confederation, he wanted to replace the Articles of Confederation with a constitution. He hoped to create a new governing body for the United States. Madison came prepared with his notes, known as the Virginia Plan. This plan, if approved, would create a vast republic with a bicameral legislature where representation was determined by population. The Virginia Plan was the fruit of his labor, after years of hard work and self-disciplined research. It contained all of his ideas on forms of government, and he was very proud of it. In fact, Madison would have preferred if nothing got the least bit altered from his Virginia Plan. He would have loved to see the Constitution reflect exactly his ideas, but as we all know, everyone has different opinions and disagreement was bound to happen. The opposing plan was the New Jersey Plan. It was created at the convention by delegates from Maryland, New York, and smaller states who felt like representation by population gave larger states more voice in the legislature. The New Jersey Plan hoped to create a single legislative house with the same number of representatives by state. The Virginia Plan hadn't even been introduced yet when the first clash of opinions took place. After Madison presented his idea to scrap the Articles of Confederation and create a new governing document, some of the delegates were opposed and felt that it wasn't their place since it was not what the Continental Congress had called the convention for. But in the end, Madison won, and the convention began discussion of what the Constitution would look like. There were many more disagreements to come. A major disagreement was how the legislative branch should be organized. Many delegates from larger states voted for the Virginia Plan's idea of a bicameral legislature where representation was determined by population. However, smaller states felt like their voice wouldn't be heard in the legislature like that, so those delegates sided with the New Jersey's plan's organization of a single house with equal representation for each state. The votes bounced back and forth and no decision could be made. Finally, a compromise was reached. That compromise is known as the Great Compromise. It decided that the United States would have a bicameral legislature where one house is determined by population and states have equal representation in the other house. Now that they had decided that, the delegates had to decide whether slaves counted towards taxation and population of states. Naturally, Southerners wanted them to count towards population, but not taxes, and Northerners wanted the opposite. So they put into play an old compromise Madison had come up with, the 3/5 rule. This made 3/5 of the slaves count towards taxation and population, making it fairer for both parties. Not only did James Madison come up with the ideas that are reflected in the Constitution, but he supported them, along with two other people, Alexander Hamilton and John Jay, through a series of essays called the Federalist Papers. Even after the Federalist essays tried to convince people of all the benefits of the Constitution, some citizens were still leery. They felt like this new form of government established by the Constitution would take all their rights away. And so to prevent this from happening, they demanded that a Bill of Rights be added before they ratified the Constitution.
Yeah, I think there are three ways that we can see James Madison's influence today, even in 2015. And the first one is our current structure of government. So we have three branches and checks and balances built in so that no one branch can become too powerful over the others. And that's really a direct result of Madison's influence that he had at the Constitutional Convention in 1787. So when he arrives in Philadelphia, it can be argued that he's probably the most prepared delegate there at the entire convention, with the most knowledge of previous forms of government throughout the world. And his ideas are outlined in what we call the Virginia Plan, and it's really, those are Madison's ideas. That plan really kind of shapes how the debates go. Finally, when they sign the Constitution, many of the ideas in the final version are Madison's ideas. And the Constitution is still our governing document today. So I really think that structure that he outlines is one way that we can still see Madison's influence. Another one, kind of similar to that, is the Bill of Rights. So once again, I think this is something every day that as citizens of the country, we can feel Madison's influence. Mm-hmm. And then another thing I think is kind of important, I think that we can easily see every day, is our religious freedom, both in Virginia politics, but also at the national level. He's really a champion of religious freedom. I think those three things are our structure of government, Madison's work on the Bill of Rights, and his kind of lifelong connection to religious freedom. These are just three ways that Madison's influence can still be felt today in 2015.
There's absolutely no way that our Constitution could have lasted 225 years if it weren't for James Madison's planning. Also, they think it would never have been ratified if he hadn't written all those Federalist essays along with Hamilton and John Jay. It just shows how one person's actions can change the course of an entire country, because we still abide by this Constitution today, over 225 years later, and to me that's really amazing. Next time you go to church, speak your mind or use any of your freedoms granted in the Bill of Rights. Next time an election rolls around and the people get to choose who is in office and represents them, think of James Madison and all his hard work to establish the Constitution and create the government of the United States we have today and guarantee our freedoms. It is even more amazing when you realize that he has done this all while overcoming the adversity of his epileptic seizures. I don't know whether or not our country would be successful without him, but I know for a fact it wouldn't be the same, and for that we need to thank him.